Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. 25 years ago, one of the greatest historical films ever premiered. The name of the film was Gettysburg. The name of the director, Ron Maxwell. Welcome to Connor's Corner, Ron.
Hi, Mike. How are you? Good to be with you.
The movie Gettysburg, it's got a lot of lasting power. You know, every friend of mine I know has bought a copy of it, whether it's DVD or back in the old VHS days. Did you ever think this film was going to be that successful when you started?
Short answer, no. You always, every film you make, you're doing the best you can. You want to reach an audience. I must say, having said that, we approached it with great seriousness of purpose. We understood from the get-go that we were telling one of America's great stories, that it was a story that was near and dear to the heart of every American, and that we had a great obligation to get it right. So we approached it with a seriousness of purpose and a humility, and I think that helped us because I never lost sight of the fact that the story we were telling was of the generation that was caught up in that horrible conflict in the 1860s, and that we had an obligation to tell it as truthfully as possible, to convey as much of the humanity of that generation as possible, and also, as has been well noted, to do it with a sense of compassion, without taking sides, without judging, just presenting it with great historical fidelity. So I think for all those reasons, we had a shot at it being accepted and a shot at it standing the test of time. Now, the test of time, of course, we're not there yet. That's at least a century, because now cinema is older than a century, and we can see, looking back, the films that stand the test of time. But to have gone this far, a quarter of a century, and still have the film widely in home video release, and also not just the numbers, but the testimony that I hear from individual people, from all generations, from young children, from graduate students, from older people, the witness that I've heard from people over the last quarter of a century is deeply gratifying.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question the film stands up very well over time. Of course, we'll see in the next 100 years. We won't see, but we'll find out what history sees. When did the project start? How did you first get interested in making a movie about Gettysburg?
I first read the novel The Killer Angels in 1978. It was published and won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 1975. But the moment I read it, it just gripped me in that deep, visceral place that grips filmmakers, and I knew I just had to bring this story to the screen. I felt that I was personally called to bring this story to the screen. And it started what turned out to be a 15-year saga from the time I read the book to the time the movie was in theaters. I tracked down the rights and optioned the rights, met the author, Michael Shara. He and I became great friends. And then after about 2 years of development, 78 to 1980, I had a screenplay that I then shopped around and proceeded to have every studio and every network slam the door in my face. One of my producer friends told me, when 10 people tell you you're drunk, lie down. But I think one of the essential ingredients of being a filmmaker is to never take no for an answer, and to keep on keeping on. And finally, after a long, arduous series of turn downs and no's, Ted Turner and I met, and it was as if he was waiting for me to walk in his office for all those years, because once he and I met over this project, we immediately discovered that we were kindred spirits. We both shared the passion for it, and then thanks to Ted Turner, it was made.
Now, some people may not realize this, but Ted Turner has a small part in your film.
Yes, he wanted to have a little cameo, so we did some research, and we found out that Colonel Patton, Confederate colonel, who in fact was the great ancestor of the General Patton from World War II, was at Pickett's Charge and was shot at the Emmitsburg Road, fatally shot at the Emmitsburg Road. So we reproduced that uniform with historical accuracy, and tailor fit it for Ted. And the night before we were going to shoot that scene, we had a dinner, and with some of the actors, and I said, Ted, we're going to shoot your scene tomorrow morning. Now, I can do it two ways. I can keep the camera low to the ground and shoot up against the sky, in which case, we ought to be able to get it done in, 20, 30 minutes with maybe 50 extras moving behind you, reenactors. Or I can, if I lift the camera up off the ground and I lower the lens down and I can see the whole field behind you, like we happen to have 2,500 guys on that day working on a Pickett's charge. We had them for many days during that week, and I said we could do it that way, but it's a bigger deal. It's going to take longer to do your shot. He said, I want to do it the big way. So the next day we were out there with the whole enchilada, with 2,500 guys and all the. And when you do that, when you can see the field, we got to set all those explosive charges. We have to, smoke. It's a big deal. That's how he wanted to do it, and he was entitled since he was paying for the whole damn thing. And we shot it the first time, and he shot it. If you remember, he shot at the fence. And if we did take one, it's a big, massive setup. We did take one. Just a slight hesitation from when the squibs go off in his chest to when his hands go up there. So I said cut. And of course I said we got to do it again. And I told him, I said, the microsecond you feel those things burst on your chest, the microsecond your hands you got to react to being shot. So we did it again. Everything else he did was great. The expression, the movement, the action, and we had set up again. 15, 20 minutes set up, if maybe perhaps longer, to reset its position. The thousands of reenactors back in position, the smoke, the explosions, action. He did it again, and he nailed it the second time. So I said, cut, print. And he said, just call me Two-Take Ted.
Did he ever act again? Was he ever in another film?
Yes, he had a cameo in Gods and Generals.
Okay.
He played the same general, the same colonel, obviously before he was shot. During the winter camp, between the winter of 62-63, when the Confederate Army was camped down on the Rappahannock River, and he's in the scene when they're singing the Bonnie Blue Flag.
In retrospect, you put together a great cast. Some of them were well known when you started the film, but other people became better known later on, like, for instance, Stephen Lang.
Stephen Lang and Donald Logue. A number of the actors who had supporting roles in Gettysburg went on to do many more films and important films and have really big careers. Yeah, no question about it. And but I think every single there's more than 150 speaking parts. They're all listed at Internet Movie Database, and whether they just had one word or soliloquies, they were just perfectly cast. I look back on that film, and whatever shortcomings I may personally think the film has, or where I didn't maybe achieve what I wanted to achieve, I have to say it was absolutely perfectly cast. I wouldn't change a single person. So, wherever the camera went, no matter what scene we had, whatever they were Confederates or Yankees, everybody just showed up and nailed it.
Well, that can be seen, and that's one of the reasons why I think the film stands up so well. And one of the things I like about your films in general is that you do not take 20th, 21st century characters and put them into the 19th century.
Right, because it's what's the point of imposing our attitude on any people who lived before? That's just like excessive virtue signaling, saying the filmmaker saying, "Oh, look how cool I am, I get it." What a waste of time and money, and really, how boring would that be? Although it's done, as we know. No, I think when you do a historical film, it's not they who can learn from us. They're long dead and gone. They're in heaven. They're not with us, so they're not going to hear us. We, however, can hear them. And that's the challenge of filmmaking in a period film. We can hear them speak to us, but only if we make the effort, again with humility and modesty, without thinking that we somehow are a more enlightened generation, a more sophisticated generation, which of course is nonsense. Every generation that ever lived thinks they're the center of the universe. That's normal. But are we better people? No, of course not. human beings are human beings. The humanity doesn't change over century and millennia. Style changes, law changes, custom changes, other things change, but not basically the humanity of people, whether they're in China, Bangladesh, or North America. So I think it's incumbent on the filmmaker to go where they lived, into their moral universe without judgment. Because as soon as we go with judgment, we're gilding the lily, or we're changing the narrative. We're twisting things to fit what we want to hear. To go there, for instance, the 1860s, again, takes a willingness to let go of our preconceptions, let go of our attitudes, let go of our sense of moral and ethical superiority. Oh, they held slaves. I would never hold a slave. Well, of course not. Who would? Well, you'd have to go to ISIS to find somebody who'd want to hold somebody in slavery today. So we get it. Of course nobody subscribes to that horrific thing called slavery. But in the 19th century, some people did. And it's a harsh reality, and we have to understand that. And there was also child labor all over the United States, all over Western Europe. 7- and 8-year-old kids working in factories, losing their fingers, etc. A lot of horrific things were going on. And so we have to go back into the mindset of that time with the humility to understand what made those people tick. And those people, just like people now, are motivated by base instincts and exalted inspirations. The whole gamut of human nature. So when you approach the 1860s like that, then you can begin to understand and embody what's in the title of the novel that the movie is based on. The novel is called The Killer Angels, because that's a quote from Shakespeare, from Hamlet. What a work of man is God, how noble in instinct, how divine in reason, in form and action, how admirable, in action and apprehension, how like an angel, in action, how like a god. So that, yes, we have the killer and the angel instincts in all of us. And as Alexander Solzhenitsyn famously wrote in the Gulag Archipelago, the line between good and evil cuts between every human heart. And so once you accept that and embrace that, then I think you can begin to do a movie on the Civil War without taking sides, without sitting in judgment, and understanding that the entire generation of Americans who lived through it, male and female, black and white, blue and gray, north and south, endured a horrible, tragic experience. Start there and then tell the story.
Ron, we need to take a short break. You're listening to Ask the Lawyer with me, Mike Connors. We're talking to Ron Maxwell, director of the classic movie Gettysburg. Welcome back to Ask the Lawyer with me, Mike Connors. We're continuing our conversation with Ron Maxwell, the director of Gettysburg. Now, getting back to, a thoughtful movie, if those of you in the audience haven't seen it, if you get it, is Copperhead. You have two main characters. One is opposed to slavery, but doesn't mind if thousands of people die getting rid of slavery. Another man is a pacifist who would live with slavery and doesn't want to see lives wastedly thrown away. And I think it's a very interesting study and something that brings us back into the 19th century mind.
Yeah, that film, like the other two films I made set in the American Civil War, explores other facets. There's a French saying called l'envers du médaille, which is the other side of the medal. There's a shiny side of the medal. That's the side we see when soldiers wear it. But there's a darker side, the side that's never shown to the light. And again, it's this duality of human nature. So in the North and in the South during the Civil War, there were people who did not subscribe to what their governments were doing. There were Southerners who were opposed to secession, whether or not they endorsed slavery. I know it's very hard for modern man to understand that some people endorsed slavery in the 19th century. It's mind-boggling, but some people did. But even those who did not, there were some people who were opposed to secession. Those stories haven't really been explored all that much in cinema. Same thing in the North. It wasn't monolithic. Everybody didn't say, "Oh, we need to keep the Southern states in the Union," or by 1863, after the Emancipation Proclamation, "Oh, we need to free the slaves." No, it was very, very fractured and complex. There was a whole variety of opinion, and some of the opinion is embodied in the main character in the novel Copperhead, which was written in 1899 by Harold Frederick, who was a young boy during the Civil War. So he was writing about things he experienced. And up in that part of upper New York State, around Utica, around that western upstate New York, There were communities that didn't think, why are we doing this? Why are we sending our sons to go die in a slaughterhouse in Shiloh or Antietam? For what? In other words, their attitude was to hell with Alabama and Virginia. Let them secede. Let them have their own country. It's not our business. And in the attitudes of the average person in the 1850s and 60s, the sense of the state being your sovereign home was very strong. We don't have that today. We have it in sports, your local team, your state team, your state college. But, we think of ourselves as Americans. We don't think of ourselves as Virginians or New Yorkers necessarily. But back in the middle of the 19th century, there was a dualism. Yes, they thought of themselves as Americans, but there was also a very strong state consciousness. So the characters in this town in Copperhead, it's a work of fiction, just like The Killer Angels is a work of fiction, but both movies are meticulously researched. So the fictional characters are put in the real world, and so the two fathers who are the antagonists in Copperhead, one played by Billy Campbell and the other played by Angus McFadden, are diametrically opposed because the Angus McFadden character believes in the new war aim, which is the new war aim. Remember, it was only after 1862 in the Battle of Antietam that Abraham Lincoln elucidated the Emancipation Proclamation. So we're 2 years into the war before an official war aim is the freedom of the slaves. Before that, it was only forcing the southern states to go back in the Union. And so the Billy Campbell character says, not my war, not my fight, you can't have my son. But of course, his son wants to enlist. His son is gung-ho. The other father, played by Angus McFadden, is all for the war. He sees it as a war of liberation. His son, however, is a pacifist, and he doesn't want to go. So the sons are mismatched with the fathers, and that's part of the tension in the film, the tension between fathers and sons, in addition to the tension between the two fathers, which ends up dividing the whole community and tearing apart the whole community, because there's some who believe in the war and some who don't, which raises the question of the dissenter, because the person who dissents against his country going to war is always the subject of severe criticism in any war, in any time, in any country. Whenever the country decides we're going to war, and you're the guy who says maybe not, you subject yourself to a lot of peer pressure at worst.
Yeah, because like the Billy Campbell character, he doesn't like Abraham Lincoln. And today, that seems, practically sacrilegious.
Yeah, well, we've elevated Abraham Lincoln to a kind of a secular sainthood for very understandable reasons. He preserved the Union during his presidency, and he emancipated the slaves. So that's not hard to figure out. But again, putting yourself in the context of the time, there were a lot of people who didn't want to go to war. I mean, and as the war proceeded and the death toll mounted into horrific numbers. I mean, now we look back, more than 700,000 KIA. That's mind-boggling. More than 700,000 KIA, I want to say it again. That's not even counting wounded in action, missing in action. It was horrific, the death toll. It completely ravaged the South and some of the border states. So as people were living through this and losing their sons and their fathers and their brothers, well, what are we doing this for? What are we trying to accomplish? So there was a lot of doubt. And probably, I mean, historians argue about this, but had there not been the dual victories of Vicksburg and Gettysburg in July of 1863, in the following year, which was the election year, 1864, for president, historians argue that the peace faction in the North would have prevailed. They would have said, we got to cut a deal with them. They would have called the European power in to negotiate a peace deal. The war would have ended in negotiated settlement ending in two countries, where there is now one. But that's not what happened. In fact, there were two stunning Union victories, one at Gettysburg and one at Vicksburg within a week of each other, within almost a day of each other. And, nothing succeeds like success. And so at that point, the average Northerner would think, yes, the death toll is high, but we're winning. And, winning excuses many sins. So the war continued to its grinding, horrific finality with many, many more casualties into the April 1865.
Now, I understand October 12th, 13th is going to be a celebration. I guess most of the tickets are sold out. The Gettysburg Foundation, what are they doing?
Well, there's a few things going on. The one I'm attending is the official one that's being hosted by the Journey Through Hallowed Ground, which is an organization that's now about 15, 16 years old, that celebrates and protects the area, the kind of one of the cradles of American civilization, which is a swath of land anchored in Gettysburg in the north and Monticello, Jefferson's home in the south, and in between you have Native American history and African American history and colonial history and the French and Indian War and the American Revolution and the Civil War. So it's just a rich area for people who live here to enjoy and for tourists to visit. And the Journey Through Hallowed Ground's mission is to protect it, to celebrate it, to encourage tourism, so that it doesn't get all paved over and turn into a strip mall. So the Journey Through Hallowed Ground is sponsoring the events on Saturday, October 13th, where at 5 o'clock there's an address by Alan Gelzo, the head of Civil War Studies at Gettysburg College and a great Civil War historian. Then I'm going to speak for a little while about the making of the movie. And then the film is going to be introduced by Professor James Robertson, another great Civil War historian, retired now, used to be the head of Civil War Studies at Virginia Tech. Then we're going to show the director's cut, which not everybody has seen, which is a half an hour longer than the movie that was released. And then at the end of the film, all the cast that's visiting, we expect to be about 12 or 15 actors from the film, will be introduced, and they're going to hang in the lobby afterwards so that people have their albums or their CDs or DVDs or whatever they have. The cast will, and I will be there to sign them and have a meet and greet. So it'll be a really fun evening on Saturday, October 13th at the Majestic Theater in Gettysburg, and tickets are available. There's 800 seats, and I think they're about half sold now. They're $25 each, and they can be purchased online at Majestic Theater, Gettysburg.
Okay, well, those I have the tickets for, and I've got some tickets for the dinner on the 12th, but some of my friends were looking for tickets on the 12th. We'll see what happens. Getting back to the 21st century, Chris, my producer, is telling me that you're involved in lobbying as far as intellectual property is concerned. I think that's an issue that's overlooked right now. Can you explain it to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, since, I forget what century it was, but a few centuries ago in English common law, they evolved a term called copyright, and that it came about so that the creative work of writers, whether they were journalists or novelists or playwrights, whatever they were writing, whatever they were creating, could be protected by law because it has a value. Otherwise, everybody would steal it or reproduce it, and the creators would, they'd have to go into another line of work. They wouldn't be able to survive. So we've now lived with copyright for a few centuries. It was incorporated into U.S. law ages ago. It had some modifications, like how long is the copyright? Is it 75 years? Is it 100 years? These debates go on. And everything was fine until the Internet age. But what the Internet facilitated, among all the wonderful things it facilitated, who would argue against that? It's changed our lives in many ways, which are quite improved, no doubt about it, our access to information, etc. But the downside is it's made it much easier to steal what people do creatively, whether it's music, whether it's writing, whether it's whatever creative work is. So IP, which is the initials for intellectual property, has now become a big issue because now this theft that the Internet has enabled, not that the Internet is stealing it, it enables the stealing, makes it easy to steal it, is now a worldwide phenomenon, and it's sucking tens of billions of dollars out of our economy, tens of billions out of the U.S. economy. So when we talk about the balance of trade, this is working against us. The other thing, I mean, that's just numbers. But on the ground, it's putting people that I spend my lives with in harm's way. That's filmmakers. You know, I mean, we hear about the handful of filmmakers that are making mucho bucks. God bless them. But that's not the industry. The industry are mostly people who get a paycheck on Friday, just like any other industry. And these people are getting hurt because if you make a movie and it's stolen, and the investors don't get their money back, or their profits get whittled down to next to nothing, they're not going to invest in movies anymore. They're going to go somewhere else. And if they don't invest in movies, the movies don't get made. The cameramen, the electricians, the hair and makeup people, the grips, the drivers, the electricians, nobody works. So this is a great industry. It's a great American industry. It's in fact one of our biggest exports. It exports our culture. It exports our product. It exports what we make creatively. And this is now at risk because of this massive theft that's being enabled principally by the policies at Google, by policies at Facebook. All the big platforms, they don't want to take any measures to seriously crack down on this. So a few months ago, the government passed a measure that forces them to crack down on child trafficking, on sex trafficking. They wouldn't even do that voluntarily. It's unbelievable. It took an act of Congress to compel them to crack down on human smuggling. And so, of course, they don't want to do anything about protecting copyright, because they don't want to do anything that interferes with what they call, the Internet's got to be free. The Internet's not going to be free. Well, I'm sorry. It's not free. Because it's what it is. What they're really saying is the Internet should be the law of the jungle. We don't have the law of the jungle in any other part of our lives. You can't go onto a car lot and just steal a car. What is that? It's not freedom. That's chaos. And so we have to impose some law and order on the Internet to protect intellectual property. And it's nothing to do with the infringement on freedom. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. I'm a filmmaker. I defend freedom. I defend freedom of speech. I never want to see freedom of speech impinged on in any way. But what these giant companies are doing, they're destroying and repressing free speech by shutting down filmmakers and writers and artists who essentially go out of business and have to then drive taxi cabs or Ubers or wait on tables. Nothing against people who do that. Hard work is always noble, no matter what it is. But people get forced into jobs that they otherwise wouldn't do because they can't make a living out of what they should be doing.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves is when people buy bootleg copies of films. You're stealing money from the filmmakers, from the artists, from the actors.
Totally, and I've actually, people said, "Well, Ron, why should I spend $12 for a video when I can get it for free?" I said, how come your whole logic and your whole sense of ethics and morality disappears when it comes to like movies and music? I mean, you wouldn't go into a 7-Eleven and steal chewing gum off the stand. I mean, it is amazing to me how people have this kind of dual system that they've worked out in their heads, because it's so easy to sit at home, hit a button, and just steal something. But it is stealing. Let's call it what it is. And then the next level of justification or rationalization is that, well, we're stealing from big mega companies. Who cares? No. Yeah, you may think you're stealing from the big mega company, but you're stealing from every single creative person and every single person who works on those movies. You're stealing from the little guy. That's the reality. Because the big players at the top, no matter how much theft goes on, no matter what happens, they're going to line their pockets. They're going to protect themselves. That's the way the system is built. So who gets hurt? As usual, the little guy. So we need to get real about this, which is why I go and help my friends on the Hill to lobby Congress and say we need to get some rules of the road here. We need to protect intellectual property, or we're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
I'm with you. Wish the best. Ron Maxwell, thank you for bringing history to life in Copperhead, Gods and Generals, and especially Gettysburg. And good luck. I totally agree with you. You shouldn't be stealing. No matter who you're stealing from, you shouldn't be stealing. And that's what we're dealing with right now.
That's right. No, it's a huge problem. And I think we got to. And here's another thing I want to say on this, Mike. These companies are out of control. I mean, 100 years ago we were facing monopolies, and the U.S. government had to take charge of things. And I'm not a default let the government solve the problem kind of guy. I'm for free enterprise and for laissez-faire to the extent possible. I know I'm sounding like the antithesis of that, but sometimes only the government can handle this stuff. And these companies are now so big, these trillion-dollar companies, and they're run by 2 or 3 or 4 guys. I mean, this is a massive amount of power in the hands of a small group of people, unelected, unaccountable. So we're at a tipping point here. The U.S. government has got to rein these people in and get some control on Google, Facebook, Twitter. These big internet companies are all mostly clustered in Silicon Valley, and say, hey, I'm sorry. The American sovereignty is important. American liberty is important. We can't let all this power be sucked into one place with a handful of guys, unelected and unaccountable. IP is just one manifestation of the problem, the way creative people are getting ripped off, but it's seeping into all sorts of areas. So I want to encourage this Congress to take a good look. This is bipartisan. This is not a Democrat, a Republican, left, right issue. This is an American issue that we got to watch out, because sometimes monopolies are antithetical to our liberty.
Well said. Ron Maxwell, thank you for being on Connor's Corner.
You bet. My pleasure.